Okay, we're back. We're going to practice a couple comma examples based on what we talked about in the first video. Okay, so remember, we need to put commas in certain places when we are writing down geographical locations. We need them in dates, and we need them with people's titles, MD or junior or something like that. So if I say Paris, France is my favorite city, remember we need to put a comma between a city and a state, or a city and a nation. Okay, Taylor lives at 21 Center Street, comma, Nashville, comma, Tennessee. So between, because it's in a sentence, between the street address and the street, the city and the state. Today is Tuesday, comma, June 4th, comma, 1984. Between the day of the week and between the month and day and the year. Nothing here, nothing between the month and the day. All right? All right, and he was hired in June 2019. No comma, if only between the month and the year. All right? All right. So, the next kind of comma I want to talk about has to do with what we call dialogue and quotations around dialogue. So, you know, dialogue is when somebody's saying something, or when we're quoting something out of our research. We use these kind of quotes too, but this is mostly about when people are saying something. So if I said, Alice said, come in quietly. All right, Alice said, come in quietly. So we need to separate what is said, the words that are said. So those are the words she said, come in quietly. We separate that from what's called the main discourse. Of the sentence. Now, you don't have to remember that term. It's not going to show up on the GED or the high set, but we are making a distinction between a quotation and the main discourse. So the quotation is what is in quotation marks, and the main discourse, I call it the he said, she said, right? So between this part of the sentence and what's in the quotes, we always have to put a comma. Now, that's true even in a case where what's being said is separated in a sentence. So, where will you stay? She asked. When you arrive. All right, so what are the words that are being said here? It's where will you stay when you arrive? So she is asking, where will you stay when you arrive? Those are the words that are being said. So here's the he said, she said, the main discourse, and the stuff in quotes is the quotation. We have to divide the main discourse from the quotation. So we have to put a comma here, and we have to put a comma here. Okay? So where will you stay, comma, she asked, comma, when you arrive. All right? And incidentally, if this is a continuation of the sentence, we don't capitalize that first letter there. All right? Now, when you're typing, it's important that you remember that the comma comes before the quotation mark, and the comma comes before that quotation mark. All right? All right, so that's another kind of mechanical comma or miscellaneous comma. All right, now on your handout, I do want to say that number 1 is about parallel structure. We've talked about that in another lesson, parallel structure. And number 5 is about interrupters. We have some other lessons on interrupters. So appositives or relative clauses or other kinds of interrupters. So we're not going to talk about those right now. But we do need to talk about number 2. And number 2 is when we have adjectives. If we have more than one adjective describing something, we have to decide whether we need to put a comma in between the adjectives. So if I said, look at that fat, fluffy cat, right? So cat's a noun. I have 2 words describing. It's a fat cat and it's a fluffy cat. So those are adjectives. And since we have more than one adjective, we have to think about whether we're going to put a comma in between them. Is it look at that fat, comma, fluffy cat? Or are there no commas there? Here's the trick. If I can say those in any order, or if I can put and in between them, then I have to put a comma. So I could say, look at that fat, fluffy cat, or I could say, look at that fluffy, fat cat. Either way, I could say, look at that fat and fluffy cat. If I can do that, I have to put a comma in between the adjectives. Not a comma here before the noun, but in between the 2 adjectives, I have to put a comma. Now, if I can't put those in any order, if I can't change the order, then I'm not going to put a comma. So if I say, she wore a blue wool sweater. So sweater is a noun, right? And I have 2 words describing it. It's a blue sweater and it's a wool sweater. So I have 2 adjectives here, both describing the same noun. Now, I couldn't change the order of those. I couldn't say she wore a wool blue sweater. I have to say she wore a blue wool sweater. I'll give you the reasons why, but you can probably hear that just doesn't sound right to say she wore a wool blue sweater. It sounds right to say she wore a blue wool sweater. The reason for that is very complicated, and if English is your native language, then you probably don't even think about this because it just doesn't sound right to say she wore a wool blue sweater. The reason why, if you've learned English as a second or third language, then maybe you learned this in an ESL class, but there is a certain order in English that adjectives have to come. So certain elements of adjectives, we need to put them in different orders. The number of things, the color of things, the size of things, the quality of things, the material things are made of. There's a certain order they go in. It's useless to try to memorize the order because every list you look at uses slightly different words to define the qualities of the adjectives, so it can be very confusing. And the order is not going to help us anyway. The best way to learn the order of these adjectives is to really get an ear for what sounds right and what doesn't sound right. How do we do that? We read a lot, or we listen to a lot of well-spoken language. So reading a lot is the best way to develop our ear for which way sounds right in English and what things don't sound right in English or any other language. It's true for any language. All right, so the trick then is if I can change the order, I'm going to put a comma between the adjectives. If I can't change the order, I'm not going to put a comma in between them. Okay? So, we're going to take this lesson today and we're going to carry it forward to the next lesson. In the next lesson, in the next lesson, we'll just do exercises with these, okay? That'll be the whole lesson. We'll just do exercises. So we'll get to try out these rules in different ways. All right? Okay, thanks.